welcome back to the Seattle Sucks podcast about hating the city we love, and also welcome back to the Naiad.
Yes.
We're back on the boat.
SV Naiad, we're back on the boat.
And
the boat you all know and love. The
and a
boat
brutal,
that is my home.
And a brutal irony, me and Bryn have engaged in a project, a home improvement project at our house. Now we can't live there, and now we live on Naiad.
Yeah, we all cuddle up together in the V-berth.
Oh, Greg, you know that we sleep in one of the many bedrooms you have on your large boatal estate.
My floating manse, yes, my super yacht.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
You might say.
Well, you know, not all of us were losers in the death of Paul Allen. All right, so...
we were all winners.
So lots happened since we last talked to everybody. Things are going great in Portland. Nothing to report there. And in Seattle, Decrim Seattle released a budget plan for SPD, all of which we'll get into. But Greg, first, I got to tell you, I woke up the other day and I saw this tweet because, you know, anytime Mayor Jenny tweets, I have a direct notification to my brain. It just shocks my brain to let me know I need to check it out. So Mayor Jenny Durkan, America has lost a hero in the conscience of our country. Generations are indebted to his life of service. His fight for equality and civil rights will drive us to be a more just nation. Rest in power. This was to John Lewis, the representative who died, famous freedom rider, famous for being beaten up by racist cops during the civil rights movement. And Mayor Jenny, just letting them know, rest in power.
Absolutely fucking vile. Could there be anything more disgusting than that?
Yeah.
I mean,
as me and about 100 other people mentioned in the replies, she absolutely would have called the police out to beat the shit out of John Lewis.
we that's pretty
we
clear.
know as a fact.
I mean, we've been in the streets, fighting for racial justice, just as John Lewis and the rest of the Freedom Riders and SNCC were doing when they, got the shit beat out of them and fire hosed. I mean, there's no shame,
Yeah.
when you're playing this double game like Jenny is, you can't have any shame when you want to, say the things that you have to be a, progressive mayor of progressive Seattle. When you want to deny, when you want to situate yourself politically somehow on the side of equality and justice, but in your actions actually enforce the white supremacist police state. Like, there can't be any shame. How could there be? Like, That's where we live, everybody.
Yeah, just cynicism turned up to 10 here. Which, speaking of which, she apparently also went to a judge to ask that. So there's a petition to get a referendum. I mean, this is our dumb political system, right? There's a petition to potentially get a referendum to recall Jenny Durkan, right, to make her step down. And even though, I guess this is maybe a sign of how seriously Jenny takes it, she went to a judge and begged a judge to throw it out. To not allow the collection of signatures. And I guess the judge agreed with her on 6 of the 7 points that the petitioners, sort of argued for why she should be tossed. But on the 7th one about her using the police to violently repress protest, the judge was like, "Nah, I think that's fair enough." So all this in the same weekend.
Well, and her state, her argument to the court was basically I have no responsibility to make SPD policy.
Yeah.
Which is that almost sounds like a resignation letter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, her argument was that, she has basically no control over what SPD does or anything like that, which honestly probably is partially true. But you're right. It's a resignation letter at that point.
Which,
it can't be my fault. I'm completely ineffectual as a politician.
Yeah. It's very lawyer-brained argument. But, it's Jenny sucks and all, but and it's totally cool that people, that she's being attacked from all sides. People on the council have signaled a willingness to, if it comes to it, try to impeach her. Obviously people put this petition to the court together that they're going to then gather signatures on now that that was approved. That's cool and all. What that means politically for actually the prospect of making change in this town. What we do know is that Jenny, already she really had no mass constituency. You know, we've been saying for months she's not going to actually run again. But she still had the sort of establishment consensus behind her. No mass constituency. The right-wingers hate her. Anyone who cares about, you know, another human being also hates her. But she had the sort of inertia of establishment politics behind her. And now, and that, you know, that weighed heavily on the council, you know, like just the reality of that. Now, once she really turned, once she became toxic by, you know, toxically gassing an urban neighborhood, it's clear that made her sort of toxic to the council. That sort of made her a lame duck, basically. And then the final straw was sending that letter to the council asking them to impeach Sawant, to which they're, you know, it's like, you know, it's right after that they passed a veto-proof majority of the progressive taxation. They passed the repeal of the loitering laws. Both huge victories, good victories, and what it signals is that the Seattle process has broken down, right? That the mayor is not a part of that process. That the council views the mayor as out of that process. And I really do think that letter asking them, we said this at the time, is like politically insane to ask a legislative body to expel one of its own.
Yeah, it's longest sitting
on your on the basis of your political grievances with them is insane. It's that's not a thing that happens for the obvious reason that they don't want it to happen to them. It's like the base reason. And there are a lot more reasons than that, but it's like that's not how legislative bodies operate.
And for, you know, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people on the council who don't like Shama Sawant, but if they were to give in to that demand, you might as well just not have a city council anymore. At that
exactly.
Point.
And they all know that, and they all respect their own office and think themselves as powerful, and their own legitimacy comes from the fact that they were fucking elected. Yeah, and they're not. And that's, you know, that is your position as a legislator. You feel that every day. You know that. That's why you're where you are. So for the mayor to just be able to go like, look, this person's been mean to me. Here's some bullshit excuses for you to do my dirty work. Like, no, you're not going to take that bait. And so she's totally marginalized now, which is how they're, you know, I think that really matters. That process broke down, which means like we're no longer calculating. At this point, they were calculating like just how to get things without her, which meant not bringing her into that process and passing veto-proof majorities. And now we've seen the same 7 sign on to defund SPD by 50%. Now, this is going to be a long fight, but Jenny, the point is, I don't know that Jenny needs to go anywhere, you know? If it comes to a moment, I guess we've said this 100 times, if it comes to a moment where they need to get rid of her to get this, the defunding passed, then hopefully that'll happen. Until then, you know, I wouldn't make it like a priority. It's fun to talk about, but you know.
Yeah. Well, it's more funny just for people who personally dislike Jenny Durkan.
It is.
To realize
it's cool.
that it means 2 things are true. One is that even amongst a COVID disaster, growing disaster in Washington State, Jenny, it must be at least scared that they can get the signatures. And the other one being that I think the real thing is that she's terrified that if she gets recalled, there's no place for a Biden administration.
Well, there's obviously, There's that's what she, of course, really wants is to get the fuck out of here and never run for election again and be appointed to something. But, you know, even a campaign... It's so funny because, again, like, she has no constituents. She's already done this to herself. But, like, even a campaign to gather those signatures, if that becomes a big, like, issue that's going on that people are talking about, like recalling the mayor, that recall fights tend to take up a lot of oxygen. Okay, a lot of news, a lot of politics. They tend to dominate things, which is why I'm not, like, super jazzed on that.
Well, some of us remember.
But it was fun. But from her perspective, she knows like it takes up a lot of oxygen and is potentially very bad for her. But I don't see how it gets any worse for her, really, because she can't pass anything now. She can't do anything.
Yeah, she's useless now. Well, yeah, I mean, some of us remember when Scott Walker moved to break the public unions in Wisconsin and people went in the streets and stuff. The Democratic Party in Wisconsin got people out of the streets by involving them in a prolonged recall process that was just an enormous disaster.
Absolute fucking travesty. They spent months on this recall campaign that took up every bit of oxygen and was like, and it was, it's worse even than like spending all of that time trying to elect one person and thinking they're going to save things, but getting rid of something, you just got a vacuum there that could be filled by anything. So it doesn't really matter. It's fun and cool and good. Jenny sucks. Her power, just by all this happening, by the demands that she resigned, by this petition, by the court saying it's okay, blah, 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 it's all diminishes her power to stop whatever the council does next month. Now, that's good. So, but like, we can't spend a shitload of time on this.
Yeah. And I think the thing that you mentioned earlier, that the Seattle process is broken down, I think that's true in another way that's very real, which is the Seattle process of just putting things in endless committees and going on and passing the buck back and forth between the city council and the mayor to ensure that nothing that's popularly wanted ever gets done. That has started to break down.
That has short-circuited that channel. There's no one to pass back and forth to. All they are now out on their own. We should actually just abolish the office of the mayor in Seattle.
Like there's no reason to have a mayor. So, but yeah, and another sign of that process breaking down and the city getting dangerously close to actually like serving the people is that Carmen Best has begun to panic and has posted. She posted or gave a speech, and then Dave Croman sort of broke down the bullet points. But basically said, if our budget gets cut 50%, these are all the things we're going to lose, and tried to, scare everybody, meaning that Carmen Best is scared that this budget's going to
this is going to happen. Politics. She is having to get into, rather than dismiss it, rather than just ignore it and dismiss it. This is real. This is the uprisings in the city, and the organizing is working. And we're going to talk about that at the end when we talk about the new plan from Decrim. This is very important to understand. Like, these hands are being forced. Jenny is on the defensive. The council is on the offensive. Carmen Best absolutely on the defensive against this plan.
Well, and it's a problem, right, that she can't gas away, right? She can't tear gas it away. And I mean, just humorously, she tried to sort of exclamation point her fear mongering by saying that if we defunded SPD by 50%, there wouldn't be a SWAT team anymore. And I think this just shows that, one, she's on her back foot and has no idea what the people in the city think or want.
Yeah, because it's funny because like cares. when people who are for defunding the police by 50%, what they say is, cool, the first thing we're going to do is get rid of that fucking SWAT team.
Literally, number one on every defunded list, no more SWAT team.
Yeah, or near the top anyway.
It's
just fucking stupid. I mean, they also had that tweet where they're like, we're going to have to fire all of our
all the black
and indigenous officers if you do this. And it's like, nice try, asshole. Well, first of all, revealing, of course, that they've only just recently started, because they were basing this on seniority, right? Like first in, first out if you're doing layoffs, or first in, last out if you're doing layoffs. So revealing they've only in the last few years started. They have there's very few like senior people of color in SPD, relatively, statistically. But also it's like you don't, the entire point of defunding them is to take their power away. And again, we will get to this, that a big part of that is hiring and firing power, and the fucking the contract, which also people have pointed out it's bullshit. They're even within the rules of the contract, even without throwing it out, there are ways to get around that, which the city has the power to do.
Sure.
First of all, if you're starting to do this, if you're taking this power and you need to get rid of people before you lay people off, you should be firing a lot of people. With bad records. So like that'd be the first thing. Before there's any layoffs, there's going to be shit canning people without their fucking bennies. You know? So that again would have to be the start. So hilarious that she's so on the back foot. It's great.
Yeah. And again, I mean, nothing better than going on Twitter to tell everybody that if they try and defund your police department for its racism, then the department's going to have to engage in some massive systemic employment racism. Just amazing.
Yeah, we just have to. I mean, but this is everything, right? Everything in cop mindset is a hostage situation where they're the hostage takers, right? It's like, listen, don't force us. Like, this is what we don't, just
don't
comply.
Force us to prove everything
comply.
you said about us wrong. Or to be correct.
Just
right?
comply or we'll shoot you. This is everything they think. It's hilarious.
So speaking of hostage situations, you heard about this Portland thing, Greg?
I've been to Portland. I've been to Portland. It's a
weirdly, look,
charming little old fishing village.
It's charming. I am firmly of the belief that you should only be in Portland for 4 days max and should leave. But I will say, in Portland's defense, maybe the best restaurants like per capita.
Brian's talking about the strip club
in the
culture down there. But
but yeah, maybe.
Oh, so you're saying it's a vibrant city?
It's a vibrant city.
They've got a vibrant creative class.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of city.
What Brian's saying is we could use more of the kind of gentrification that Portland has seen over the last 20 years here in Seattle, as if we don't have enough.
We need the Portlandification of the West Coast.
Yeah, cool.
Just like the Seattleification of the East Coast. So anyways, point being is that federal troops are currently in Portland.
So you probably know, like,
I'm sure you guys have seen the videos.
They're on like 50 some days of protest there that has been really consistent, more than anywhere in the country. Seemingly. I mean, the thing is, there's been a fucking media blackout now on all the protests, which continue to go on basically everywhere. But there's been a really like nightly consistence to the Portland protest, mostly at the Multnomah County Justice Center, basically literally every night. And the other consistent part about it is that Portland police have at no time backed down and have continued consistently to use full, riot tactics every night for 50 nights, basically. And some days have been bigger, some have been smaller, but it's been very consistent. Yeah,
and we mentioned this on the show. And in Portland, similarly to Seattle, there was an injunction filed against the police department against using tear gas, and then the city council told them, all crowd control weapons. And Portland Police Bureau has just used them anyways, repeatedly over and over again. Once again, showing how useless these things are.
Just like here, in the court injunction here, there was like, a stipulation, unless it was necessary for reasons, And so they just declare a riot. And, what's different is just, in many ways, it was, exactly what was going on in Seattle for like a week and a half, and that the politics are just different, such that I don't know. Maybe it's just they didn't have a Shama Swant to come and stand on the front lines. I don't know. I don't. Maybe it's that, and this is believable, that the Portland police are just more determinedly, like overtly, self-consciously white supremacist than Seattle. Just because that is possible that they're even more hyped up about beating back Black Lives Matter. I think it's a lot of factors go into it.
Yeah, there's absolutely some truth to that, because Portland has had an organized anti-police movement for a lot longer than most cities in the United States. Their response to police violence over gentrification dates back to the early 2000s, as opposed to in Seattle, right? In the last 10 years, it's been 20 years of this in Portland. And the other thing, too, is, and this gets into the federal troops and their sort of response to the Portland protests. Portland was where they shut down one of the immigrant detention centers, right? Portland has been a thorn in ISIS side for quite a while as well. So I think there are a lot of axes to grind between the police and the people of Portland, and they're grinding them.
We seem to have seen over the last 5 years, seem to have seen like one of the most evidence of like absolutely 100% direct contact and coordination between white supremacist orgs and Portland Police Bureau.
Also, a lot of Nazis in Oregon.
Oh yeah, just like the Northwest in general.
Yeah.
The Washington territory, or the Oregon territory, was basically seen as like, let's go have a white paradise for a long time. The most successfully segregated place in America. And Portland, a lot of racists, a lot of Nazis up here, and for whatever reason, Portland, there is something about like the Portland police even having just a little bit different character, as like. As much as Seattle police like have a real hard-on for protesters in general, dating back a long way, the Portland police there's a lot of history of like direct coordination with alt-right and white supremacist orgs. Real fucking Nazis, these guys.
Yeah, and when we were having the pro-gun, like, Patriot Prayer groups coming up to Seattle every week, right, they were all coming from Portland, which is, like, an interesting, so, I mean, just a long history. I mean, Portland's, like, a weird place. At some point, we should have somebody from Portland on here and do a little discussion of it, but, I mean, the thing that is interesting is that what seems to have happened in Portland is public anger over the Portland police, attacking protesters and gassing them, reached such a point that they decide to do this little sleight of hand where they're like, oh, well, how about if instead of Portland police gassing and beating people, we just had federal police gas and beat people?
Look, I mean, it's very possible, Trump now, like a month ago, was saying, like, if you don't fix your shit out there on the West Coast, we're going to send in federal troops. And it is possible that, again, because of the different political character of Seattle, this is maybe part of why SPD backed off and had to change tactics, because this may have been the thing. We don't really know what's going on, who's in control of what in this city, what the battles between Durkan and Best are, but it's not crazy to think that the both the very public admonitions from Trump himself and whatever they were hearing from federal agencies behind closed doors gave Durkan the motivation and the sort of the hand to make SPD change tactics to prevent this from happening here, prevent federal cops from being deployed here. That is a real possibility. That is not what happened in Portland. They just kept doing what they were doing, giving almost an invitation to the Trump administration to come in with federal troops. And so now we know over the last week they've done that. They've shown up, you've probably all seen it, seem unmarked, apparently federal agents in camo and full like battle gear, showing up on the streets using crowd dispersal munitions, tear gas, and also just black bagging people on the street and putting them in rental enterprise vans and driving away. Now we know that more information has come out, and there've been there's been like memos leaked and more public statements from Homeland Security saying that these are largely, it seems, the Border Patrol.
Yeah.
Of the federal law enforcement agencies, like the kind of perfect, I think, tell me if I'm right here, the sort of perfect nexus for this job of like real like cop, shithead, racist mindset, but like a level of sort of training and professionalism that makes them deployable in this way, as opposed to like ICE, which is just like fucking, bumbling, beer-gutted shitheads who like even the feds wouldn't necessarily like try to send in this role.
ICE is probably the next stage when they just want people to run through the streets shooting people.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, basically what you're doing is we're going through the various federal departments and various police agencies that the state has at their disposal, and we're finding out which ones are the most comfortable with attacking people in their own country, right?
Yeah. And, which I mean, there you go, Border Patrol. Yeah. Fully. So they're feds. Think of them. So they have cop mindset, but they've always been deployed in the United States. That's been their entire role always. Including, not just the border. They've all for many years they operate within like a few
Carter,
hundred miles.
They've had a interior orientation and as well as border orientation.
They're fully 100% militarized, way more than your local cops, and they've been working directly with active duty military on the border, training. God knows, I'm sure they've been to Israel too. But like, their day-to-day thing is policing in the border zone, like whatever, 100, 200 miles from the border, directly like shoulder to shoulder with the army.
Yeah. And whatever you think of police accountability in American cities, that looks like a strong, reliable regulatory regime compared to the Border Patrol.
Yeah, Brian has written previously about the just wanton murders committed by the Border Patrol that just go totally unchecked.
Yeah, not even mentioned. I mean, famously, there was a murder of a teenager in El Paso. He was actually on the Mexico side of the border, but by a Border Patrol agent in El Paso who, when it got to the Supreme Court, the Obama administration argued that it can't be illegal or be seen as illegal because then the U.S. murdering people abroad would be illegal. So, like, as they argued in court, if we had a drone strike on somebody, then that would be illegal. And so the court was like, well, shit, that's a good argument. I guess the Border Patrol can do what it wants. So these are, this is the agency that we're talking about. This is the kind of political cover they've been given historically.
And now this has been organized apparently into something called PAC. This is coming out, I think, just this morning or yesterday. Get ready to be hearing that word over the next rest of your life, I assume. The Protecting American Cities Task Force. The boots on the ground in Portland seem to be largely, again, Border Patrol, but, this is coming out of Homeland Security. This is about using federal law enforcement troops to put down resistance in American cities. The leaked memos that have come out, various journalists have written this stuff up, say that they're actually being deployed or have been deployed to other cities, apparently, and are standing by, ready to act. So you could be seeing this come to a city near you. And, this is what... This is the confrontation, right?
Yeah, and we know that in Portland that the federal authorities have been operating out of the Portland Police Bureau. So basically, there's been a close hand hand-to-hand relationship between them, and they're apparently targeting and black bagging individuals, which is concerning. The thing is, what we're seeing is the natural endpoint of what the ultimate goal was behind the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and the creation of police fusion centers, which, happened after 2001. And these fusion centers are to bring together various law enforcement agencies to, quote unquote, monitor terrorism. But as people noticed pretty much immediately, what they actually were monitoring was anti-war protests during the Bush administration, Occupy Wall Street during the early Obama administration, and Black Lives Matter during the Obama administration. That basically what it is a unified police response at every level of the U.S. state against popular movements inside the U.S. borders.
Yeah. Well, maybe, if you're not really old like us, or you don't, sit around, reading cop shit like Brian, you may not realize that the Department of Homeland Security is something that was slapped together haphazardly by the Bush administration in the short period after 9/11, based on this argument that, the reason we didn't stop the, most deadly attack on American soil ever is not just because the people at the top were incompetent shitheads. It's because the federal, law enforcement and anti-terrorism wasn't sufficiently coordinated, and there were these competing fiefdoms and all this, which, is bullshit. That's a whole other story. But the fact that the top people in the White House were stupid, dumb shit, right-wing assholes is why 9/11 was not stopped. So, but also what they did then was create there's so many fucking federal law enforcement agencies, but previously they were all basically the law enforcement arm of some government department or sometimes some government departments had more than one that had very specific duties and and prescribed limitations within the law. And by combining them all and making them in this structure, taking them out of other departments, so the Secret Service, right, is an oddball one with a funny name that used to be the Treasury Department, because their job originally, before they started protecting presidents, in addition to that's a whole different story, but was they were the Treasury's law enforcement division because they
were fraud control.
Yeah, they were about tracking down counterfeiting. So they were a little way previous to the FBI. They were like the FBI, but for currency crimes.
Yeah.
And shit like that. the everything everything is like that. And now they're basically just in one sort of all in one house that can then pick and choose like who gets used for what. And then we've seen that those powers expand under the Bush administration. Certainly, the Patriot Act was this huge expansion of the government's power to sort of police citizens within and surveil people in the United States. But then there's the Obama administration.
Yeah. There was this thing in 2011 called the Defense Authorization Act, and basically what it said, because Obama had this little issue. He wanted to murder American citizens, right?
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is the cool guy president, right? He wanted to drop bombs from robots on top of American teenagers. And, that created some potential thorny legal issues. So what he did was they had the 2011 Defense Authorization Act, which basically said all the rules we made up for the war on terror, basically saying that we don't have to follow any international standards when it comes to just murdering abroad, that actually applies at home too. So since the signing of that act, you actually can detain anybody without trial. You can detain anybody without even telling them why you've detained them, simply by labeling them terrorists.
So what you're saying is what the federal government is doing in Portland, blackbagging random protesters who are just exercising their free speech, is completely legal.
Yes.
Thanks, Obama.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a very darkly funny article from the Oregon Public Broadcasting. It's actually been the only group doing good journalism on this, where they were interviewing, I believe, an ACLU attorney in Portland who was saying, on its face, just kidnapping people off the street and disappearing them would seem to be illegal. And then in the next paragraph, except for the fact that this 2011 Defense Authorization Act, if this is the authority they're using to do it, then it makes it legal. Now, the funny thing about that is if that is the authority that the Trump administration is using, they don't have to tell anybody.
Yeah.
So
basically, all this stuff,
just by keeping their mouth shut, it is de facto legal.
Right. I mean, all this shit from the Patriot Act, the Defense Authorization bills, these are all things that give all these tools to get around basically the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
They can honestly, somewhere in that shit probably says they can quarter federal troops in your home. Okay,
yeah.
Don't be surprised if it does, or if the Supreme Court will uphold that at some point.
Yeah.
Because this is the Obama administration that didn't prosecute torture in the CIA, that covered that up. Let them get away with it. Didn't dismantle the Patriot Act and Homeland Security Act. Instead, just continued to increase the power of the executive to police American citizens, to murder American citizens, and very importantly, expanded the fucking Border Patrol in part of its grand attempted, appeasement of whatever was in their heads. Who cares? They expanded the Border Patrol and its powers, militarized it further, deported more people than ever, and that is the Border Patrol, the most militarized, most racialized police force the feds have, and it's huge.
Over 20,000 members. And the thing is that the Obama administration also normalized the use of ICE for putting down political dissent, as famously Obama did when there was going to be a march on Washington of immigrants, and he used ICE to put down local immigration groups that were organizing it in Maryland through giant immigration raids. So, I mean, these are all, during the Obama administration, when some of us were complaining about that stuff and everybody was just going, vote blue no matter who, at least it's a Democrat, all that kind of stuff. This was the problem with that.
So imagine now when they're telling you vote blue no matter who, because we have to get this authoritarian out of the White House who's, look, he's sending all these Dems, the Oregon Dems, who are all like, oh my gosh, Donald Trump, he's sending federal troops. This is outrageous, and they're thinking to themselves, oh, good, we're going to use this against him in November to get Joe Biden elected. Yeah. This is not only Barack Obama's vice president, but a guy who realistically actually way to the right of Barack Obama, and who has spent his entire life in building the power of the cops.
Yeah, his entire political career is putting police on the
So
street.
whatever happens here, whatever escalations continue in Portland, wherever else they go, do not think for a fucking second that any single piece of that is going to be rolled back under a Biden presidency. Expect them to be expanded. Expect the rhetoric to be a little different, because this is the only difference between these two parties, between these two candidates. The emphasis, a Biden administration probably won't brag as much about sicking federal troops on protesters as Trump, though who knows? This is Joe Biden we're talking about. Probably they'll let him out in the country, out in public, and he will brag about it, but then you mostly won't hear from him, and you'll hear from other mouthpieces who will use like the Obama playbook of being a very savvy murderer who doesn't brag about it,
Yeah, we'll go back to how Obama talked about his use of federal troops and actually mercenaries to put down protesters who were protesting the pipeline, doing the pipeline protesting. The Dakota Access
Standing
Pipeline.
Rock.
Standing Rock, right?
I mean, those photos, look, that was a dress rehearsal for, in the 21st century, massively putting down, using the full brutality of a militarized police forces coordinated on American soil against protesters, and that was the Obama administration.
Yeah, and the
Obama-Biden administration.
Yeah, and the thing is that basically news agencies, either ignoring or reporting in the most passive ways on what's happening in Portland, like the New York Times, who basically the only thing they had to say about it was, looks like those federal troops might have not had the proper training, to the fact that Biden hasn't made a single comment about it, to the fact that all these Democratic politicians, Nancy Pelosi down, are just basically giving the thoughts and prayers tweets. We're really concerned about this, man. Thoughts and prayers to those people in Portland. What this means is this is being normalized. Just like we normalized mass shootings in schools, just like we're going to normalize hundreds of thousands of dead from a pandemic that, is causing havoc here in a way that it's not having in other countries. Just like we're going to normalize that. All that kind of stuff. All this is being normalized. This is the future, all right? This is the future.
Yeah, it's a boot stomping on the human face forever.
Yeah, except for,
listen, is this the yet another really sort of garish and obvious chapter of America's turn to full fascism? I don't know. Is it something actually worse? Because, if you want to define fascism as requiring real, genuine mass politics on the right that they pretend to have but don't really. It may be worse because all you actually need is this fully developed and technological police state that can surveil everybody and has, stormtroopers on every block. So whatever is coming, whatever confrontation is coming, has been coming for a very long time. And this may be the new face of it. So the question is what can we do?
Yeah, and so that brings us to another thing, which, this show we've said, repeatedly, that basically we have to win in the streets, right? If we don't win the streets, if you don't severely hobble your local police department, things like that, the reaction to this movement is going to be devastating. And Decrim Seattle, local group, hopefully you guys are familiar with, just posted their Seattle PD budget.
So this is after, this is on the heels of Jenny saying look, these activists who I've talked to, they're random plants she has meeting with, have no plan. This 50% number is just something they pulled out of their ass. There's no adults in the room to think about this.
They don't have a brilliant plan like my plan, tear gas everybody.
So let God sort them out. There is a really detailed plan that we want to talk about, maybe the first element of, we've heard this is, so Decriminalize Seattle Coalition is a coalition of a ton of Black and Indigenous local groups, including largely, I think, a lot of people from King County Equity Now, a lot of local organizers who I think have been a part of organizing some of the best and most effective local actions, but also driving the 3 demand message that is pretty much everyone but Mayor Jenny acknowledges is pretty widespread. The defund SPD by 50%, reinvest that in communities, and release the protesters without charges. Now, it's been, again, this game has been played by the city saying like, oh, there's no real demands, blah, blah, blah. But actually, this is, again, like I said, the organization has been impressive from the beginning in this town, in this uprising. And they're showing it again that they have been prepared and have been doing the work. I mean, this is groups of organizers who clearly have we're ready for this in one way or another, with the resources, with the knowledge, and we're ready to take the moment and run with it. And they just did, there was just a teach-in on Facebook that they did to talk about this stuff that we will link to in this, that, Nikita Oliver was on and talked through this stuff with a bunch of other people. We just want to highlight some of the stuff here, particularly the defunding plan, which is really cool and good. And we just want to give support to that because basically, we'll link to the actual document, but it starts with the blueprint for divestment. These people have sat, I think, in collaboration, even I think with some people within the city council, have sat and gone through SPD's budget, and now we get to really look. I mean, we've been waiting for this. We've been talking on this podcast about a lot of line items we'd like to see canned on this. Among some of those are also on this list, which is awesome. So Mayor Jenny has, what she thinks is a negotiation, has specified the 5% that she wants to cut, that's missing a zero. She has called for some stuff that ends up on this list, but we'll talk about what those differences could be in actual implementation. But okay, so it says, when we get to the SPD stuff, it says all cuts previously identified by Mayor Durkan, totaling a measly $20 million, should be transferred to the reinvestment named in this blueprint. The divestments named below expand on these cuts. Cuts could come from many places in SBD's bloated budget and should include the following actions. And this is great. This is so smart from the beginning. Why talk about this in terms of defunding? Because it tells this story, right? It says you're going to take this money away. You're going to give it to where it's more needed in the community. It shows how bloated they are, but it's also the most incisive sort of political tool that the council can wield. A lot of this is going to have to be backed up by implementation in a lot of ways that we can talk about. But this first step of just taking the money away and taking it out of specific line items is such a perfect first step. So, first thing, getting into a budget reduction here. First bullet point, freeze hiring. Yeah. Any planned hiring, including individuals in the training pipeline, should be canceled. Perfect. Yeah. No more cops ever hired on SPD. Literally ever. Great. Permanent hiring freeze. That is perfect. Eliminate funds for recruitment and retention, including bonuses for new hires. Perfect. Want to reduce the power and size of your police department? Get rid of the people actually working on growing it.
Well, I think, too, this answers the sort of pearl clutching that we've gotten from Carmen Best and Durkan alike, which is that if we cut SPD by 50%, then there would be less cops. And this is answering with a strong affirmative.
Yeah,
yes,
definitely.
That's the idea. There will be significantly less.
Yep. You get rid of, and this is something, again, these are both things we've talked, the first one's obvious, no more cops. But this stuff gets into, something we've talked about, just get rid of all this overhead of bullshit that increases their bureaucratic power and this is it. There's whole offices, there's whole desk jobs in there of people just trying to make more cops, right? And then you're paying them bonuses, blah, blah, blah. Okay, no more recruiters, none of that. Next bullet point, remove the Office of Collaborative Policing, including the navigation team. While some programs in this office, along with their administrative structure, should be eliminated altogether, officers could be moved, some others could be moved to civilian-controlled city agencies. So I don't know everything that's involved in the collaborative policing. But again, this is some bureaucratic structure within SPD that partners cops with other city agencies, including the navigation team, which again, perfect thing to just completely get rid of, which, yeah.
Well, it's acknowledging, I mean, they mentioned too getting rid of community outreach departments. And the basic thing that they're trying to say, right, is, this might sound counterintuitive to some people that are like, community policing, that's good or whatever. It's making the argument that what community policing is the police are reaching their tendrils into every community and essentially turning everyone into a snitch, right? It's about creating a snitch pipeline. It's also about creating a propaganda pipeline for people in the community itself to accept the things the police do. And it's saying, you know what? One thing we don't need, a police propaganda department. Fuck them, get out.
And the collaborative policing and the navigation team is about putting cops in more interactions with people that they don't need to be, which is a big theme in these cuts. So eliminate the navigation team and community outreach administration. That just gone, no more. And this is great because this is a story that makes sense to people. This is like, what if a lot of people wanted to do in this town for a long time? Get rid of the fucking navigation team and stop the sweeps. Okay, this is important, and this is how you do it. You do it with the budget. You don't do it by asking them nicely, by creating some other thing. You just say, no, you're not allowed that. You don't get to do that anymore. Okay, transferred out of SPD control, crisis intervention response, community service officers. So these are like civilian. These are like small programs of civilian responses to various types of crises or the community service officers, like people to have around who are not cops, but right now for some reason, which are like potentially good types of programs that could be expanded, but for right now they're for some reason controlled by SPD. And again, you want to just everything you can possibly get out of SPD's hands. So this is good.
Well, and that ties into another thing that they have further down the list, which is eliminating or taking out of SPD's hands traffic enforcement and parking enforcement. Yeah. And this one, the police don't need to be doing that. And the other part of it too is that it ties in. Erica Barnett had highlighted this last week, I think, in a tweet. She showed a graph of the actual why people call 911. Right, like what all the police calls are. And it turns out very little of it is actual crime.
Yeah.
Like the vast majority of it is cars parked in the wrong place, right? Car did this, right? All this kind of stuff. Or it's a person, homeless person outside, do something about it, right? And basically what it's saying is, you know what? Probably 60, 70% of 911 calls, the police don't need to have any participation in any way whatsoever. And the fact that they actually are in charge of these things is creating contacts with the public that's getting people killed.
Yeah. Well, they are necessary if your goal is to hide an occupying military force whose duty is to oppress marginalized communities and put down dissent in plain sight and justify its existence. Yeah. Okay, so you give it all these jobs, and it helps them by having more contact with people to do their role of oppressing people, and it justifies their existence to everybody else.
Sure. Well, that and it helps the guy who owns your building keep his maybe keep his property value up. But if you live in the building, it doesn't exactly help you because you might be the one getting it called on, right? So this is saying look, we're gonna this is trying to take some sort of bite out of the class role of policing as well.
Yeah. Next, eliminate spending on new equipment. This is badass because this is the kind of control that the city council needs to take over the police department. And starting with just a blanket, no, you buy nothing new. Those cars you're driving now, honestly, you're not going to need some of them. We're probably going to have to sell some of them off or transfer them to other city departments when they need new cars.
Or we'll put them in a warehouse, and when your car wears out in 20 years, we'll get one out of the warehouse for you.
Yeah. Or more likely, they'll you give them to the city carpool to be stripped of their cop bullshit and used that way is probably what would be a good idea. Because then you wouldn't have to say you're selling them off to other police departments, But this is one of these things that needs to be enforced, right? It needs to have. This is the way to start doing these. However, it comes out in the bill. The defunding part is perfect, right? But this is ultimately an administration thing. You do need an administrative structure that is going to stand up and demand and make sure these things are done the way you want it. And because the way you want it is basically they don't get to buy any new guns, and they don't even get to buy any new ammo, right?
Yeah.
Certainly not for their like 5.56 weapons.
Well, allowing police to buy whatever they want has resulted in them owning tanks, grenade launchers, predator drones, that kind of shit. So how about this? They don't get to buy what they want anymore. Everything that they want to buy has to be fucking approved, right? Essentially is what is happening here, like an oversight board. So you're going to have to go and explain in public why you need a tank to put down the public.
Now, whatever is that position, whatever is that administrative structure, kind of doesn't matter what it is. It's about where the political power is. Really, you're going to need a mayor eventually who is willing to actually enforce, to go after these things and to push these reforms to their furthest extent and continue the fight. Now, in the meantime, the council is going to have to write a bill, hopefully that has all these things in it, that has them with teeth, that expands on exactly how. But the thing is, that may not necessarily be part of the budget part of it. And it may not be able to be realistically. They may be able to put a lot of teeth into this by taking the money away, but in the end, they're going to have to do more legislation and more just oversight and enforcement, whatever form that takes. And we've said on this show, like, that shouldn't take the form of a independently elected police board, because that's just electing cops ultimately. But the city council needs to be take these and drive them to the furthest extent, and that's going to be difficult, which means this is going to have to keep going. This fight is going to have to be indefinite for the rest of our lives, basically. Eliminate spending on the yes, this is one we have talked about directly. Eliminate data-driven policing. Okay. We've said directly on the show, get rid of anyone sitting at a desk collating, collecting, publishing data and using it for any purpose. That's a bunch of people getting paid too much to do something that SPD should have no part in. The city's going to need to collect data on what the cops do and what is going on in the city, what is sometimes called crime statistics. But SPD should have no fucking thing to do with that, because again, what cops have done is part of their power is that they've grown these bureaucracies that make them these fully encapsulated things that are insulated not just from control, but have all the power within them. So they're the ones who analyze and report crime statistics that ultimately justify their jobs. That's obviously a bad idea. So just fire all those people. Gone. Totally taken out. They should literally be, again, this may not be, if you get rid of, and I think it is in here later, basically getting rid of the communications department. Another thing we've said directly, get rid of all PR people, and so that they literally can't talk to the public. Now, getting rid of the funding for that is the first step, but that doesn't mean somehow they will find a way to have someone, work in administration, working on data and telling people about it. So you're going to have to follow up with this with more legislation that actually bars SPD from certain activities, but also enforces that just with an iron hand of a city administration. But this is the right start, because the next thing is eliminate North Precinct capital project. So that's the cop bunker that they want to build up there. I think there's still parts of that going on.
I mean, there's a hole in the ground built for the precinct. I could think of something to do with that hole, but
yeah, me too. Eliminate professional services, including photo enforcement. I think that's that's traffic cams, I think.
By the way, long since proven in various legal battles to be completely useless for controlling traffic, just pure money generation.
Yeah. Sworn hiring in HR. So this is great. This is this is the kind of granular detail this is getting into. This is basically saying that means they've got, I think what this means is there's sworn cops who are in the HR department at SPD. We don't need that. Again, this is cops in a bureaucracy is something that needs to be eliminated. And I love that they are thinking through it on that level. Yeah. Ultimately, if I think they've rightly said, if we make this about completely firing every cop and completely abolishing SPD next year, that's not a feasible plan, right? But by making it a 50%, what you can do is get it down to literally just the cops on the beat.
Yeah.
And then you can whittle them away from there. And that's what you got to do. You got to get rid of, no cops shouldn't be hiring cops. The city should be hiring cops, someone outside the police department.
Well, and again, too, those HR jobs and things like that are these kind of like make work jobs that the police department can reward officers with and stuff like that. And again, this is about breaking that sort of political power, right? Like there should
be no good jobs in SPD.
Yeah, this is like a Tammany Hall kind of reform here, right?
Yes,
I'm saying like the police don't get permission to hand out make work jobs.
Recruitment and retention. So they talked about above basically. So this is like on a personnel like department level. They talked about limiting funds used for recruitment and retention, but this is actually eliminating the jobs of recruitment and retention, community outreach, implicit bias training, something we have said on this. No cop should get any kind of training ever again. It's a waste of money and time. It's stupid. Don't do it.
It's a fig leaf for what their job is, right?
Yeah.
And I think, too, this is a recognition of the fact that racism in policing, sexism in policing, all this kind of stuff, this is not an accident. This isn't the police having bad ideas. It is part of the structure of policing itself. So why the fuck, implicit bias training is just a fig leaf to cover for that. So fuck it.
This is, instead of buying into the bullshit, they're just saying, they're not even saying, like, no, we're not going to spend more money on training like Democrats want to do. They're saying, no, literally get rid of it. Now, I say get rid of all training altogether. This says implicit bias training. Communications. Literally, again, something we have said on the show, fire all the PR people.
Yeah.
No one should have that job in SPD. And then later, again, you should enforce that no cops are literally allowed to talk to the public.
Yeah.
Like they should literally not be able to give statements to the press. Good luck with that. But there should be no spokesperson for SPD except literally the chiefs. Like they should be the only people who are allowed to give press conferences or talk to reporters.
Yeah.
Now, that's not something you'll be able to enforce. A lot of this stuff, what'll happen if you just defund it is people in the administrative staff will take on these roles that were previously had a whole department, right? Okay, so if you had a communications department, now the assistant to the assistant chief will now basically become the PR guy for SPD.
Yeah. Well, if your propaganda department has 50 people and then the next day it has
one person,
it's a lot less effective.
It's good.
And that's
very
the
good.
Idea.
Yes. But again, you need to enforce this stuff ultimately. Cut SPD spending on Homeland Security, a misnamed unit that is mostly designed to police large events like Bumbershoot. That's great. Just getting rid of whole
So again, this is like the police run like The Sopranos, right? And
it's a cushy thing. Yeah.
Instead of letting them sit in lawn chairs on a construction site and collect money, they're actually going to have to work, right?
If this goes through, the uproar from cops about having to do an actual job, like everyone else in America, most people so SPD, they give you these cushy jobs for whatever, but then even your average beat cop is sitting in his car eating fast food 90% of the day. If you cut their numbers down and they've got to if a SPD cop had to be responding to every call that we let SPD take, oh my God, they'll feel so overworked they'll all quit.
Yeah, good.
Even when. Hopefully they'll be responding to very few calls, but that's how fucking much we need to cut their numbers down.
And one of the things that gets police, into trouble is the fact that there is nothing to do, right? So they create work for themselves. So in Seattle, we famously had the case of the police officer who, got mad because a 19-year-old yelled at him, when the SPD officer was trying to tow his car away. The 19-year-old yelled at him about it. And so he took a work chair, like an office chair, to the guy's work, to the 19-year-old's work.
At O'Reilly's,
and literally just sat out there for hours, basically telling everybody how he was waiting outside for
an apology.
Yeah, for that guy to get out. And so, again, it's like, you know what? If you have that much free time, you don't need the job. You're gone. Get the fuck out of here. The fuck off.
And look, and that's part of, again, it's not doing this, defunding these departments doesn't get these people fired, right? It gets them, they're going to have to go somewhere else. But as part of this, there's going to have to be layoffs to, so it's not going to be, the people getting laid off probably aren't going to be the ones in these cushy jobs, right, necessarily. But you know what? You can start by firing all the people like that asshole who have some insane fucking number of infractions or one or two really insane complaints against them.
Oh, no, he had a large number.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. They all do.
Yeah.
You can just get rid of them all.
Yeah.
Okay, eliminate SWAT team funding. Hell yeah.
But Greg, won't people? What are people gonna be upset? Who's gonna show up when I complain about the teens walking through my yards on the way home from school?
There's nothing has happened in my lifetime in Seattle that would justify the use of a SWAT team.
Yeah. Well, the biggest deployment of SWAT in the past 20 years in Seattle that wasn't crowd control, that wasn't just putting down protesters, was essentially air holing
That house in the Central
kindergarten
District, right?
teachers. Yeah, a house in the Central District with 80 fucking gas grenades.
For no reason.
For no fucking reason. Nobody was even in the house. And yeah, just psychotic fucking. That was the biggest deployment of SWAT in the last 20 years in Seattle. So fuck them. We don't need them.
They're sitting
off.
around like the Maytag repairman most of the time.
Yeah.
So when you do let them out on the streets, they just go ape shit.
They've also never stopped anything. There was, I think, 8 different SWAT teams outside of Columbine during the massacre, and not one of them did anything. So fuck them.
Yeah,
They're
get rid of
useless. Fuck them.
End contracts with private firms that defend SPD in the city against police misconduct lawsuits. God, this is a good one. That's so smart. Just like, yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah. And
No more paying for pricey private defense firms for the cops. If the city can either decide to defend the cop or not, or the union can, or they can themselves. Fuck
and
them.
honestly, this is something the city council should do too. Is when the police get sued and they fucking lose, which is most of the time, that should come out of the police budget.
Oh yeah,
like that, not the city budget.
That's going to be that's a complicated one. I don't think it's covered in this document.
No, it doesn't.
Eliminate SPD's travel and training budget. Okay, so here again,
no more vacations days.
They are just eliminating training, which I love. Yeah. No training at all. Yeah. And this targets directly the deadly exchange. It's hardly the only time they travel to get trained by military forces, but they do go to fucking Israel. Carmen Best herself has been there to get trained by the IDF and how to fully occupy. This is about eliminating the birthright of cops to go to of every cop to go to a fully militarized police occupied state and live their best like
dream
like
of
going to
Disneyland
Disneyland.
when they get home. It also eliminates Seattle SWAT participates in the yearly SWAT conventions and DHS conventions that are literally just giant jerk off sessions where they just pretend to shoot people all day and get sold weapons by military contractors. No more. Got it out. Fuck
and
'em.
overtime pay, including for emphasis patrols. The emphasis patrol program was basically like an overtime program about like increasing police presence in neighborhoods that wanted to be more gentrified.
Yep.
And doing it.
It's a tool of real estate. Don't need it.
And it was basically an overtime tool. It was like an overtime policy. It wasn't. It was just like we're gonna do more copping in these places on overtime, basically.
Yep.
Reduce patrol staffing with corresponding. This is just getting into overall. After you get rid of all these people,
less cops as well.
You're not just reassigning them all to the street. You won't have the money to do that, but even the ones you have on patrol now, less. So we're literally going to have to fire or lay off half of SPD with corresponding reduction in administration. So that is key, like bringing down the administrative staff by a comparable amount. Now, this is where it gets to, I think all the next ones are actually in Mayor Jenny's plan, but we can talk about how they could be potentially different. So one huge one we've talked about from the beginning of this is transfer 911 dispatch out of Seattle Police Department to civilian control. This is huge. This is in the top level, like the like poster size bullet points of this plan from Decrim. This is one on there, the 4-point plan, which is transfer 911. I think this is a great one because, again, it tells a story. This is well thought out. It's like, what are we doing when someone's asking, well, what do you do? What do you mean take away 50%? You say, well, look, they have this enormous budget. It's way bigger than all this. And they do stuff that we don't need them to do. So there are cops in the 911 call center. And the thing is, that is a linchpin. If you're going to change what cops respond to, if you're going to replace what cops respond to with other agencies and community organizations and other city departments and limit them, you're going to have to get them out of the 911 call center because they're not going to do this willingly. You can't say, okay, we've decided as a city we're gonna have cops respond to these things where like there's some violence, and then we're gonna have other people do this and have a cop taking that 911 call. You can't do it.
Yeah,
it's not gonna work. You can't even have them in the fucking room. Now this is the thing where it also comes down to enforcement and real implementation, because it's one thing to take the budget away and transfer control, but literally you have to limit. You have to literally going to have to mandate that they're not ever allowed in the room, that they have no access to the calls until, like, they're going to have their own dispatch center in the cop shop that the 911 dispatch center, like, refers calls to when they choose to, and it's completely out of the control of SPD. They shouldn't even be able to get the data. So this is an enforcement thing, but this is a huge start, and it is a linchpin, both in sort of the political sort of story making of this and in the practical implementation.
Yeah.
It's fucking imperative, and it should be fucking easy. In fact, Mayor Jenny has even agreed to this. But again, it depends on how this is implemented, because if it's implemented by Mayor Jenny, then it's up to the people they put in there and what their policies are and how committed they are to doing this, to what they refer to on any given instance to SPD.
Well, that, and I think Jenny's idea with this is we'll take the money currently budgeted for SPD to run 911 services and use it entirely on tear gas and rubber bullets.
Yeah, right.
And I think one of the things that this, we talk about telling a story, one of the things that's going to come out and arguing about this 911 stuff is that the vast majority of calls 911 are not criminal matters.
Exactly.
There's no reason, if you're having a heart attack, that you should be talking to a cop. There's no reason, and we know there's deadly results, for ambulances to be held up by police, right? And
there's no reason for someone calling because of someone's mental health crisis, their family member's mental health crisis, to be talking to a cop, and a cop to think, okay, I'm going to send 4 squad cars to your place. They'll sort it out, and when, depending on whatever, they'll either arrest your family member or they'll call for an ambulance when necessary, when they're dead, So they just need to be out of that completely. And again, if it's run by Mayor Jenny, then in the moment, just like cops have all this like control in the moment, like whoever's taking those calls will have to be making the decision based on a policy and their own fucking personal commitment to this change, whether to involve SPD on these calls.
Yeah.
Similarly, like everyone responding to these calls and we'll get into this, we'll have to make the decision whether they radio up SPD in certain circumstances. So the next one, take traffic and parking enforcement out of SPD control. This is huge. Now, Mayor Jenny has also proposed this about transferring that into SDOT. Now, you can imagine Mayor Jenny doing that and that looking like they literally transfer all the cops who are doing that now. The worst case scenario is they're given a choice to transfer, keep their same jobs, but under SDOT. And you can imagine them wearing cop uniforms with a different badge. You can imagine them keeping their police contract and having now like SDOT employees technically be ex-cops who still are on their police contract. You can imagine them also not being armed, but having the discretion, rolling around in their now SDOT labeled meter maid cruisers, radioing up SPD to come back them up, calling for backup when they do this. So there is a bad way to do this. Now, the start, taking it out of their budget, that is the plan they're fighting for. That's what they need to fight this to make sure the city council does. And I think that is going to get, because again, Jenny's even for it. That is going to happen, I think, in a bill next month. But again, ultimately, it's going to be about implementation. And that's going to be the city council following through on this. It may be difficult to prevent, it may be difficult after winning this fight to actually pass laws that say no ex-cops are allowed to be hired by other city departments. Okay? That may be ultimately hard. I think there does need to be a fight to throw out the police union contract. At the very least, even if some fucking ex-cops need to, hopefully they don't end up in any of these other jobs. I think you need to fight to make that happen. But I could see it. I could see us, winning this fight, and if you lose the next one, you have these like worst case scenarios happening. So it's important to be vigilant and just on the lookout for that and thinking through that as you go ahead.
Yeah, and I think too, when Jenny talks about again, moving 911 out of, or 911, Jesus Christ, out of SPD control, or moving traffic enforcement out of SPD control, what she's saying is when we make the very tiny cut in the SPD budget, I want it to all come out of here and keep the core of SPD intact, right? And this is why the 50% thing matters, is that say, no, we want to do that, and we also want to gut SPD.
Yes.
Like, this is not about protecting the core of SPD and its mission to brutalize the population. This is about preventing them from doing that.
Ultimately, hopefully what happens here is when you defund and there becomes this need to fire and lay off all these cops, that then forces another political fight, a confrontation that results in something like some kind of like truth and reconciliation process whereby cops are forced to testify against each other in order to not be fired or make the layoff list. And maybe, for the best one, the ones who come out of that process who were really cooperative and testified against all their people in court, got some cops prosecuted and had no complaints against them, maybe they're allowed to transfer into SDOT. Better that they're not at all, because you need to break the institutional memory of these places. Like if it just goes, all these cops are now meter maids with different badges on, and they can call the SPD for backup anytime they get like their cop sense going off, like they might want to kill a black person or see it happen. That's bad. But okay, next thing, transfer, again, something we've said, transfer Office of Police Accountability out of SPD control. Absurd that it's in the SPD budget at all. It's a fucking joke. It should actually just be obliterated, burned to the ground, and something completely new replacing it. But great. This is a great start for this thing. Again, this is also on Jenny's list because this is low hanging fruit. This is real obvious shit.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing, too, is that when the police commit criminal behavior, it could go to the courts like it would for any normal person. This idea of policing police is fucking insane.
Yeah, I mean,
it's absolutely
I don't
stupid.
know if the Office of Police Accountability, maybe you know this, does that encompass all of like the internal affairs?
It encompasses everything that the district attorney doesn't want to touch, which is effectively everything.
So basically, SPD, any investigative unit they have that's about investigating cops, if that's just the OPA or if there is an internal affairs unit, that should be destroyed, burned to the ground, should not exist. And whatever new structure, again, this is the next fight, but whatever new structure is put in place, it should include an investigative arm that can investigate and so
to give people an
refer
idea,
for prosecution.
When a Seattle police officer in, I think it's 2014, arrested a woman, handcuffed her, put her in the back of a squad car, and then punched her so hard in the face that he fractured her eye socket and almost blinded her, that went to the OPA instead of to a court, you know? And so that's insane.
So, again, that's why really transferring it out of, quote, SPD control isn't really the thing. Its entire structure, its entire theory, everything about it should not exist. So in Jenny's plan, this is just a budgetary trick where you say, oh, these people aren't employees of SPD anymore. They're employees of the city or of its own department or in some other city department or whatever. Or, is there a public safety department that police are under or something? Whatever. You move it up that's bullshit. But again, this is the first fight that you need to, that is the first step in the next thing, completely having that be a different process. And I think you need basically, eliminate that and replace it with a police accountability investigative unit. Basically,
that needs to be
cops who have never been cops, and you don't call them cops. Basically, you need like investigators, lawyers whose job it is to investigate cops and refer them for prosecution. Because who else is going to do it? There's right now, if you think about it, there is no law enforcement whose job it is to police SPD, to investigate when they murder. No, they investigate themselves. And in the rarest cases, they get some law enforcement agencies will get a neighboring law enforcement agency to investigate that. But even that's pretty rare. This is bullshit. There should be people doing this with the authority of the city council who've never been cops. Okay. Office of Emergency Management out of SPD control. Again, basically they should get out of that entire building, the emergency management building. That's where the 911 call center is. There literally shouldn't be cops allowed in the building. Then the last point, reduce administrative costs in line with the above cuts. So again, thinking this through, including corresponding cuts to the Office of the Chief of Police, Leadership Administration, and Administrative Operations. So as you call all of this, you trim down the administration of SPD to a bare minimum, which limits their bureaucratic power, basically.
Yeah, and honestly, chief of police shouldn't be a desirable job.
No.
Like, it should pay nothing, and people should hate you for having it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've got that covered.
Yeah, not the pay nothing part.
Yeah. No.
People hate you for having it.
Yeah. So that is Decriminalize Seattle's list of proposals for deinvestment in police. Now, this document goes on to hit the other points, including the reinvestment in community. And, this is the next part of that story, right? We're not going to go into all the details, but they have a very sort of detailed, well thought out plan here for researching how to replace some of these services that we think of SPD as doing that really they're not doing, but someone should, like, helping people in mental health crises. And a big focus of this is on actually just transferring cash into existing community organizations that are doing actual work on the ground that could be doing more without the cops ever involved, that could be getting calls from a new revamped 911 call center in the area of their expertise and physical area. And this is great because it's telling the story about how you get rid of police, how you limit the role of police, how you defund them and transfer these things to other more effective uses of that money in the community. But you're also building these organizations. And as we look ahead to whatever coming confrontation we're having in this country with the police state, I don't know if we can prepare for that. I don't know if we can win. I don't know if there can be a revolution against Capitol. But if there is, it's only going to be because of organization in community on the ground. And this plan seems to be saying, be taking a very active stance. Look, all of these, everything that has come so far in this city has been organization of people in the streets, an organization of these demands and this sort of political will. And they've brought together this group. Decrim has brought together all these organizations that are already on the ground, and they're looking ahead at they're clearly fighting this fight with the intention to follow through. Okay, like the idea of needing to, as you take power away from the police state, you need to give it back to organized community to propel the next fight. And I think that's hugely important. All we can do is organize. And that's what they're trying to do here, I think, is empower these community organizations. If you're going to fight back against a surging right-wing police state that's turning darker and darker with the passing day and empower communities, it's about doing that organization. And that, that doesn't look like maybe I would have thought it would have looked last year, but these are people stepping up to do exactly that. And so basically, we're going to need some sort of leadership, some sort of organization, and all the things that are necessary in the future, things like worker strikes, things like, legal actions that you can organize around, things like that. All that. Tenant protection, tenant strikes,
all
defending fucking buildings that are being evicted, and maintaining people in the street.
Yeah, and all that, it requires leadership, and it costs money, and if we can take that money out of the police's pocket, all the better.
Yeah. And if you can, pay that forward into not just providing these services, but building these organizations that, because of the example so far of King County Equity Now and Decrim Seattle, I can tell I just watched them do a political organization, a political education thing on Facebook a couple days ago. That's clearly on their radar, to organize community and to educate. That's all we can do. That is the weapon against Capitol and the state. Okay, is political education and organization. That's what they're doing. They also go on. Another part of the 4-point plan of the divestment and reinvestment is investing in housing. So So again, telling the story, connecting this to all the struggles basically that we're having in this city.
Yeah, and also I think too.
is educating. Just this struggle itself, by connecting it to the other struggles, you're educating everybody in this city and contributing to further organization. You know?
Yeah, and for people who want to get involved in the idiotic Twitter arguments about but how is this referring to capitalism or class or whatever, if you go through this and look through it, you can find that critique in there, right? Organized around housing, things like that. They're saying that, look, this racism, this police violence, everything, it's connected to a larger system, a profit system, right? It's connected to the inequality that is, demeaning and hurting so many people, right? And, these are the connections that need to be made. I mean, in the United States in particular, man, I mean, we need some sort of social organizations to build out of and build off of. And, the union movement is all but dead. There's no left political organizations to speak of. This is an effort to try and create one, right? From the bottom organization that has money, has resources, and wants to actually work with people. Yeah. And that's valuable.
And it is a very base level effort, right? About small community organizations, bringing people in the door, getting people services. But that's where we're at. Because we don't have those other structures. We don't have a large politicized union movement.
Yeah, if we had a robust union movement, right?
And
we live in the world we live in. So we got to build this.
And that is that is how I distill this moment down, right? Is you would have said, and I think, we would have said, in the absence of anything else, and in the absence of seeing Americans want to be organized and want to stand up, you go, well, I guess we just have to rebuild the labor movement. And I think that's a good thing. But what I'm seeing here, in this city at least, is these Black and Indigenous organizers see this moment, and turns out they're ready for it. This there's a foundational level of organization that has been grown into something larger, that is on track to be grown into something even larger because of this moment and that work that's going on. So
instead of wishing something into existence, they're bringing something into existence. And they're bringing
in people into the street to become radicalized and to become part of to these victories are going to feel important to people, right?
Of course.
If you've been in the street and we actually defund SPD, that's going to show that'll be global news, first of all. But if you were actually in the street, you're going to feel that in a very different way.
Yeah,
very specific way, I should say.
Yeah, and I remember doing anti-war stuff in Lubbock, Texas in 2001, 2002. I remember being people would say well, what's the point of doing a demonstration in Lubbock or whatever? Nobody cares. And it's we're not in the streets of Lubbock because we think that George Bush is going to be oh shit, better not invade Iraq, right? Yeah. We're in the streets there to try and empower the people that we're taking in the streets, to try and imbue them with leadership qualities and things like that, to imbue them with the confidence to go out and make political arguments and to go out and fight for something, right? And it's that's why you bring people in the streets. That's why you create these organizations. This is the base level. This is what the union movement used to do. This creates the base level of left leadership that it needs to exist. It's not going to come into existence spontaneously. It's insane to think that. So this is,
it takes work, and it's had to build from the ground up.
Yeah, and like I said, this is not wishing something into existence. This is trying to build something into existence, and that is the one thing that on the left we haven't done in the United States.
Yeah. All right. So hopefully that's a little bit hopeful note.
See how we tried not to end completely negative on this episode for the first time in weeks?
Yeah, well, listen, look, I think good things are happening in this town. I hope we stay in the streets and we follow through on it all. And anyway, just really encourage. You should actually check out the whole document. It's we'll link to it. It's I don't know, 13, 14 pages long. We just went through the sort of defunding SPD bullet points because it was the most fun and the stuff that we personally had the most to say about. But there's it's actually a really detailed plan, and like I said, there's a lot of really strong. It clearly comes from a place of a lot of strong critique and forward-looking sort of thought about how to, exist in this fucking world. I get we're out of time. We're not going to talk about the fucking COVID pandemic, which looms over all of this, and how we're basically all going to die of that, so it doesn't matter. I mean, by which I mean global warming doesn't matter. Yeah. But hopefully tune in on the Patreon episode or something for a roundup of sort of Washington State's catastrophic response to this, even though it's one of the best in the country. It's a low bar.
To think of.
Yeah. So great. Okay, yeah, we've got new patrons, Corinne, Carrie, and Allie.
Well, welcome to the fold, everybody, and everybody that's not a patron, become one. Don't be a cheap ass. Become a patron.
Yeah, we paid some of it forward recently. What did we give to
Yeah, we took your money and we gave $500 to Greg's new television. It's very enormous in the boat.
It's too big for the boat, frankly.
Yeah, it's too big. It's too gaudy. We gave $500 to King County Equity Now. We gave $200 to the Northwest Community Bail Fund. That's where your money goes when you give it to Patreon. Basically, that and to Greg's lavish lifestyle. Those are the two things. We keep Greg in caviar and champagne on this boat.
I'm like looking at Twitter right now, Brian, and it seems like there were people marching down at Westlake today, and I guess like SPD formed up against them, which I feel like hasn't been happening for weeks. So I'm trying to figure out what is actually going down with that. But
yeah, again, as we're recording, SPD seems to be taking a much more aggressive stance towards the protests, which means that I think they're being emboldened by, the pact or whatever.
Yeah, well, if it's true that the pact, meaning mainly probably the Border Patrol or other agencies, have already deployed to other cities, SPD may be feeling like, emboldened to know that they've, A, got backup, and B, want to now provoke more of this street action that will justify deploying the pact to the streets. So that's just a possibility. Hope I'm overreacting, but it's hard to tell what's going on from what I'm seeing on Twitter. But that's a real possibility. So they could be trying to bring us to where Portland is right now. I don't know.
Yeah. So hey,
get out in the streets, everybody. Either way.
Yeah, get out in the streets. If you have a union job or a non-union job, hey, maybe think about not going anymore and going out in the streets. Some work stoppages might help with this.
Yeah.
But just throwing that out there and putting it in the ether. But yeah. All that said, we'll see you guys next time with some not hopeful COVID news, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, that's going to be purely dark. There's no upside.
Yeah.
It's too late to flee America. You're not allowed to go anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, no shit. So, so we'll see everybody next time. This is the steamship Naiad signing off.
Bye.